Welcome to the Kings Beat podcast. I am James Ham, your Kings insider for ESPN 1320 and the Kings Beat. Joining me today is just one. It's Mr. Brenden Nunes from the Kings Herald and the Kings Pulse podcast. Sean Cunningham is busy today, and he's got some a prior engagement and wasn't able to make it into the show. Brenden, what's going on? How are you?
I am doing good, James. My offseason's looking a little bit more as expected at this point. I guess I should have expected the coaching search, but didn't fully understand what came with the whole coaching search from my point of view. So now that I'm focused on draft content, I'm a little bit more in my comfort zone right now, to be honest. How you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, it's intriguing the way that this season has gone because the coaching search, we've talked about this a little bit, but it was a little bit more blown up, a little bit more, I don't know, like everyone was fully engaged here in the coaching search. And that's what it felt like to me. And that's what the numbers say, that people were flooding in to listen and, hear the discussion on the coaching search. And I didn't expect that because I've been through so many other coaching searches. But, it's kind of an interesting way that this offseason has begun. It became all-consuming and kind of pushed draft coverage and everything else of an offseason to the side. And I think it's interesting that we've kind of seen it play out that way. Brenden, this isn't the way it normally goes. It usually has a different feel where, again, the Kings are looking for somebody, but sometimes it's quick, sometimes it's long, sometimes it's like some really long, drawn out, like weeks and weeks and weeks. This was 2 weeks of like really, really focused coverage on a coaching search.
Yeah, you got a lot of experience with different coaching searches, so I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, I've seen so many. I mean, even mid-season, watching coaching searches play out mid-season, that's always weird. Like when they hired George Karl, it was like from the moment Tyrone Corbin got the job, it was like, is George Karl going to come in and save the day, or are we going to continue through basketball hell and kind of figure this thing out? It's definitely intriguing. Okay, so let's get rid of some of the business stuff. Number one, if you're watching on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and subscribe. If you're listening on iTunes, give us a rating and a review. That actually helps. It bumps us up on numbers and stuff like that. Outside of that, jump on board with the Kings Beat. We've had a ton of new subscribers to Kings Beat, which is super exciting. The community is growing quickly, and it looks like we're going to have another happy hour, not this coming Thursday, but probably the week after. I'll have all the details as soon as possible, and we'll get them out. That, of course, is for premium subscribers to the Kings Beat. Super affordable here at the Kings Beat, $7 a month or $75 for a year. And you get unlimited access to everything that we're doing. So that's super cool. Jump on board. And outside of that, it's kind of been a weird week. It has been. We're watching new Sacramento Kings head coach Mike Brown lose and win as the head coach of the Golden State Warriors because Steve Kerr is out. Isn't that weird? Like if we had Thursday overreactions. I would just like
Mike Brown is ready.
Yeah, I think Stephen A. Smith said something crazy like if he would have lost this game, if he didn't already have his job with the Sacramento Kings, they would have gone a different direction. If after watching what happened on Wednesday night, like come on, people, come on, the Kings lost by more than that this season. I think a couple of times. Like that's what Tyrese Halliburton always told us. No, man, that wasn't the worst. Are you kidding me? We lost by 48 last year or whatever. So, yeah, that was uncomfortable, though, wasn't it?
It was really weird. I don't know that I've seen the Warriors lose a game like that outside of the outlier season that they had 2 years ago when everybody was hurt and they kind of took an off year in a way, ended up with James Wiseman. It was definitely weird. It felt weirdly similar to a lot of the basketball that I watched throughout the course of this season with the Kings in a way. And I'd been enjoying how different the playoffs felt with the defensive intensity and just close games and atmosphere going on. But no, this one felt like I was watching a Kings head coach. no shade on Mike Brown. Just it's fun to joke around. It's easy to make jokes there. Especially, Nemanja Bjelica being the answer that he looks for in the second half. Like, it just, the jokes wrote themselves. But, yeah, I mean, I don't look at that game and pin it on Mike Brown in any sort of way or anything.
No, they came out flat. They were up against a team that, had their back against the wall. And I just don't think that they were 100% prepared. And now you get to go home and finish the series off if you can. That series is intriguing anyways, the whole injury issues that have been going on. I mean, the league has been hit with injury issues like nonstop. I'm going to say a little bit of that has to do with the fact that, they just came through 2 seasons where they played 72 games and all of a sudden you're playing 82 and there's just a little bit more wear and tear, a little bit more like of what a season feels like normally. And so, yeah, it's been rough to watch. Bummed out that John Morant isn't in the playoffs. He's done for the playoffs with a weird bone bruise, and I don't like the whole finger pointing when it comes to injuries at this point. I just feel like Taylor Jenkins is really trying to make a point that Dylan Brooks was vilified and he shouldn't have been, and now everyone else should be vilified. So that's been kind of strange. But overall, I think this entire playoff, whether it's like Luka got hurt, why am I drawing a blank? Devin Booker got hurt. Joel Embiid's been hurt. Like, we've seen so many big-name players go down, even if it's for a game or two.
Yeah, Kyle Lowry, Robert Williams. There's a lot of different guys that are pretty impactful on a lot of these teams. Chris Middleton is likely done for all the playoffs, all the postseason. Maybe he ends up coming back. Maybe I have that timeline slightly wrong. I think there's a chance for him there. But yeah, there's a lot of injuries going on throughout the league. Sacramento was a little affected throughout the regular season with some injuries as well, but obviously a lot of inavailability for all different teams when it came to COVID protocols as well. Seeing that with Steve Kerr right now and the entire situation going on with Mike Brown, but the playoffs have been pretty entertaining. You told me, I pick your brain fairly often in this whole process, that you kind of not take the first round off, but relax a little bit as a way to kind of breathe after the busy season, which I don't know how many deep breaths you got in with the coaching search going on, but I was pretty engaged in the first round, and I got to say I ended up taking a breath in the second. So next year I'm going to maybe follow your path a little bit more and be a little less engaged in the first round. That way I can lock in more in the second, because these have been some fun games.
Yeah, it's been a lot of, I mean, there always comes a point in the season where, well, a point coming out of the season where you, like, for me, it's almost like I go into like a week or two of like weird depression, because you're so used to going so fast and being on all the time, and then all of a sudden it's gone. And there's always this moment of like, okay, I'm still moving a million miles an hour and the world is slowed down. And so I usually take that first week or two to decompress a little bit. But again, there's been too many things going on, coming out of the season. Not only did Alvin get fired, but, they had a couple other people within the organization lose their jobs. The coaching search kicked up really quick. I know a lot of people are like, hey, how come we're not hearing any names? We're not hearing anything. And then boom, 7 names a week later, 3 names a week later, coach is hired. It has sort of been a whirlwind. So you have to take those deep breaths when you see a little tiny gap in the schedule.
Yeah, something I'm getting better at for sure. I think there's too many times this season that I took those gaps as an opportunity to maybe try to brush up on some knowledge in certain areas and burnt out a little bit here and there. But the news does not stop, and just a little bit of a learning process for me that I'm happy to go through, to be honest. Like I said, though, the news does not stop, even beyond all the games that are going on. We got a little bit of a Richaun Holmes update that you broke the news for, actually mid-last podcast. If people want to try and find and guess where this happened, James got a text or a call slightly talking about what was going on with a Richaun Holmes update, and got a little thrown off when a question was thrown his way at the same time. and handled it like a professional, though, James. I didn't know until after, when I had to get on the phone right after we finished the recording. But what's kind of going on with the Richaun Holmes situation that you broke the news on?
Yeah, Tuesday was a whirlwind. So we were in the middle of the pod. I did get a call. I text back and then got a text back. And I'm not going to divulge who was calling. But as soon as we were in the middle of the pod. And when I looked down and I saw the number that was calling, I was like, oh, that's weird. And then Brenden got done asking a question and threw it to me and Sean. And Sean goes, oh, I think I'm gonna think about this one for a sec and throw it to James. And I'm like, oh no, I have no idea what it was that Brenden asked because I was all distracted with my phone. Anyway, like coming out of the podcast, it was like boom, 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 rapid fire. I was able to get my hands on the documents and sort of mull through what was happening on what's the latest on the Richaun Holmes situation. Like, look, I wrote about this, like even the way that I introed when I did release the news, it's uncomfortable. I don't like covering this stuff. It doesn't, like, I wouldn't choose to go out and be somebody who covered this type of beat, like outside of sports. Like if I were to leave sports and go do other things, I wouldn't want to cover, crimes like this or situations like this, not crimes. Cause there was probably a crime involved here, but like overall, like this situation, the way that this played out was really weird. So, Richaun Holmes has been in a nasty custody battle. We all know this because the Sacramento Bee decided to run an opinion piece on this and absolutely flayed the dude, and the Kings, both. Just like pointed fingers. I'm not going to indict, I'm not going to, say he's guilty, but I believe the other person type stuff that we saw from the Sacramento Bee. And I was like, even in that moment, like I don't want to take sides on what's happening behind the scenes and the he said, she said of the actual case itself. But I didn't like that there were other people that took such strong sides and really defamed someone's character. I mean, that's at the end of the day, completely defamed someone's character. And I don't know that like I see a lot of people say Richaun Holmes has been vindicated. And I'm not going to say he's been vindicated because we still don't know. We don't know these things, how these things play out behind the scenes. I'll just say this, like everything I read in the court documents is there's just a huge lack of proof. And so there are he said, she said allegations. She said about him allegations. But a judge ruled in Richaun Holmes' favor in an LA County court on April 21st. Richaun's former wife was supposed to hand over their son the next day. Actually, I think it was in Sacramento court. They were supposed to meet and hand over the son, and she absconded with their son and took off to Georgia. And that's where, like, when I said that there is a crime here, that's a crime. It's a crime to, it's a custodial crime, but it's still a crime to take a child out of state, especially defying court orders. So she went to Georgia, and specifically because Georgia has different laws about, domestic violence, about custody and all kinds of stuff. So she tried to venue shop, is what this is called. She tried to take her case somewhere else. And the Fulton County judge went through the thing and made phone calls, called the judge, or it's a former judge in LA that I guess does mediation and does some other stuff after retiring from being a judge, but is still considered a judge. Anyway, they conferred, and once again, the Fulton County judge looked at the evidence, and there wasn't any. She did not have proof of her claims. And so not only did, she try to rehash over what she accused Richaun of in February, which was, striking their son in the head. But on top of that, she said that there were threats, and according to the court documents, there was no proof. Nothing was given over to the courts to prove anything that she was referring to. And so Richaun Holmes has been given full custody of his son, full sole custody. His former wife is now down to 10 hours a week of supervised visits, from my understanding. And again, this isn't a victory for anybody. In a perfect world, he has two loving parents that figure out a way to get along and work through things and not have these situations go where, again, a child is being flown all over the country and dragged into courtrooms and sequestered with people that they don't know and all that stuff. But again, this is really awkward stuff to talk about. It's really awkward stuff to report on. I'm lucky enough that my wife is an attorney who went through law school and can help me wade through the complexities of, court filings and stuff like that. But at the same time, make sure that I'm balanced and fair. And to me, that's the biggest thing for this is you have to be balanced and fair. And, I don't think, I also, Brenden, I don't like that people are jumping in my timeline and calling names to the reporter that did this initially. Do I think that the B owes an apology? Probably. Do I think that they need to evaluate what's happening there and how that story made it to print? Yes, because that's not one person who writes a story and goes and throws it on the big spinning wheel of that prints a newspaper. That is a story that goes through legal, goes through multiple hands. It goes through all kinds of people. And to try to mask it in an opinion piece didn't make sense in the beginning, and it still doesn't make sense now. And so, it's awkward. I don't like covering it, Brenden. And I know this is your first time seeing it. I guess, what was your, just being there and watching this unfold? This is tough stuff.
Yeah. The first time I kind of realized that this was part of what I was getting myself into was probably the Walton situation when he was first hired, and kind of having to cover and talk about that. And, it's not something that I'm excited to do or looking forward to do. It's just what comes with it. And I really struggle with accusations like he said, she said stuff, especially when there's no sort of proof in either direction, because if somebody takes a side and then I try to, present, well, my reasons I'm skeptical for taking a side, it comes off as me then leaning towards the opposite direction when that's not what I mean at all. But I really struggle with he said, she said stuff, and can't help but think of the kid that's in the middle of all of this, and just quite a scenario for him to be placed in, and hopefully it can kind of get smoothed over in the easiest way possible for his sake and his upcoming, and having a little bit of consistency in his childhood and early life. So I can't help but kind of really focus on the kid in this conversation, and the he said, she said is difficult to deal with for sure. I struggle taking either side because I have seen both of, there's both sides of a he said, she said, and it's just a tough situation to talk about, really. And like I said, my main thought instantly goes to the kid that's stuck in the middle of this, being taken across the country to Georgia, and then just really crappy situation for him to be in, and hopefully it all works out for the Holmes family and their child specifically.
All right, Brenden, this is awkward situations, awkward conversations. We're going to try to move forward from it. Let's tie it back to basketball a little bit. Just when we look at Richaun Holmes as a player, this was like a dark cloud hanging over him. I don't think it was a huge dark cloud by most NBA standards, but it certainly was a dark cloud. Do you think I mean, look, I don't think he fits on this roster anymore. I think we've been very clear about that. I don't think he'll be back with the Sacramento Kings next year, and it had nothing to do with his off the court stuff. It has everything to do with the fact that the Kings acquired Domantas Sabonis in the middle of the season, and he no longer is a starting center for the Sacramento Kings, and he doesn't really fit with Sabonis. And you can go cheaper options at that backup center position. But Brenden, like, what do you think this does for his value out on the open market? Do you think this makes him at least close to value for his remaining 3 years and like $33 million?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I thought that when his free agency came around, that the Kings weren't going to be able to retain him for that price. It seems like the Kings and Monty McNair and Wes Wilcox thought the same thing with the kind of the way they went about that offseason. So I think that for what Holmes typically provides, it's a good price, a good value. And to get him for 3 years, I know some people could paint that as unideal that it's a longer contract. I think that there's also some teams that could look at that as a more favorable situation because typically Holmes is pretty consistent. This is the outlier season. There was, now we know, like this off-court stuff going on as well for him. He obviously had a complicated situation when it came to everything basketball related as well, with 2 different eye injuries that are total outliers. He caught COVID at one point during the season, right? So to play 45 games, and we're talking about a guy that last year 63% from the field, 14 points, 8 boards, like 1.6 blocks per game. He's not a phenomenal defender or anything like that, but I think he's a fine defender for his position. He's very switchable. I think that there's teams that he makes a lot of sense on to be a starting center. So, I don't think he's going to fetch you great value in the open market or in trade conversations this offseason, but I do think that in my mind, this player should still have positive value. Like, I don't think that it's very easy for me to look at Richaun Holmes last season as the outlier, and I don't have all too many concerns on like why any reason that would continue into this next season. Am I being too optimistic with that, or where are you kind of at with Holmes' value?
No, I think he is who he is. I mean, he is a solid defender. He can defend the perimeter really well. The 1.6 blocks per game the previous season might have been an outlier. But at the same time, this is a guy who, he's a hustle player. He's an energy player. He's a guy who really fits modern NBA sort of defensive schemes and offensive schemes for that matter too, as a pick and roll guy. If I look around the league, I can tell you that like the Golden State Warriors could use a guy like him. The Los Angeles Clippers could use a guy like him. Heck, the Los Angeles Lakers could use a player like him. But not just that, Charlotte Hornets, Chicago Bulls, I think Utah Jazz. We can keep going down the list of teams that could use somebody who has versatility as a defender, as a big man. And that's not to say that the Kings can't use that as well. But when you look at what the Kings have, they really do have a center who's going to play a very specific style. And guys like Damian Jones or Nemi, they're kind of what's coming next for this team behind Sabonis. And you also have Alex Len under contract. So I think that the Kings will aggressively try to move him both on
because Sabonis is a 5 to them for sure, right?
Oh yeah, Sabonis is a 5. I don't think there's any questions. As you get further along in your career, you tend to, like, if you're a 4-5, you end up becoming a 5. If you're a 3-4, you end up becoming a 4. It's just the natural progression of like becoming an adult and growing into your body and all that stuff. And I really would have a hard time seeing him going back and playing heavy minutes at the 4. Nor do I see really a reason to do it. Even if you were to play him alongside a guy like Damian Jones. Damian Jones to me would be the 4 in that situation, just because he's more versatile as a defender. He can go out and cover different guys, where Sabonis really is a strong position defender and team defender. But when you get him out in space, he's going to struggle, and he's not a natural shot blocker and stuff like that. So, yeah, again, before any of this happened, any of the off court stuff was known. I didn't expect Richaun Holmes to be back, and I don't think my opinion has really changed on that. And I don't think the Kings are going to have all that much trouble moving on from him during this offseason. Brenden, go ahead. You got something?
Yeah, what sort of value do you think? Like, we've talked about the Clippers. I think a team that is really switchable makes a lot of sense. Like, I think Marcus Morris as a player prototype is a guy that makes a lot of sense. Character stuff is maybe a little bit questionable. You've talked about Luke Kennard. Obviously, the team really needs shooting. Like, are either one of those guys who are both about $15 million a year? Morris has 2 years. Kennard has 3. Like, that's probably a generous return for Holmes.
I don't know. It just depends on how he's viewed around the league. Like, again, if you go to other teams, I think there's going to be something that pops. Again, we've talked about PJ Washington. He'd make a lot of sense for the Sacramento Kings. He only makes like $4.5–5 million a year this coming year, so you'd have to take on someone else in that deal as well, unless they have some salary cap freedom this summer, which I don't think they do. But again, that would make sense. Looking at the Chicago Bulls roster, you probably could come up with something. Again, Dallas Mavericks, I think that there's probably one or two players on those rosters.
Hardaway Jr.?
He makes a lot of money.
He does.
Yeah,
shooting.
No, yeah. I wouldn't think that the Kings are going to go that type of direction, as much as they would see if you can break his contract into 2 people, maybe 2 younger people. That would make sense. Maybe see if you can just look at a position of need where you're trading a starting level power forward for a rotational / starting level small forward. Whether you can find that deal or not, we'll have to look hard.
Anything that's not a point guard or a center, pretty much at this point.
Yeah. I mean, even if Nurkic leaves Portland, would he make sense in Portland? Yeah, he'd make sense in Portland, and and if they get Lillard and Simons and Nasir Little and all those guys back, to a guy like Josh Hart still makes sense there. So that's what I mean. There's going to be deals. There's going to be players that become available that make sense, and teams that have needs that Richaun Holmes would make sense for. And we'll have to see how it goes. But I would be surprised if he's back next year. But at least we're through this rocky patch for right now. I mean, I think, again, this is always going to be something that's there. It's not like because a judge ruled that there's not going to be more court hearings in the future for this family. And so you're going to have to deal with that. That's going to always be part of his conversation, I think, at least for the next few years. But at least we have some resolution as where we're at right now. Brenden, this is kind of weird because we got so sidetracked with, number one, the Holmes situation, but also the coaching search, that we had to abandon the draft right away. And the NBA draft lottery is coming up. It's what is it, Tuesday? The 17th?
It is.
Yeah, the 17th of May. And as of right now, the Kings are they have the 7th worst record in the NBA. They have a 7.5% chance of moving to number 1, 7.8 of moving to number 2, 8.1 of moving to number 3, 8.5 of moving to number 4. They can move up. They have a 31.9% chance of moving into the top 4. They can't get the 5th pick. They can't get the 6th pick, but they have a 19.7% chance of landing number 7, a 34.1% of chance of landing number 8. So they have a higher chance of being number 8 than any other spot. They have a 12.9% chance of being number 9. That would mean that 2 teams jumped over them from the back end of the lottery up. And then a 1.3 chance of landing number 10 and less than a 0.0 chance of landing number 11, which it's 0.0 something chance of landing number 11, but the odds of 4 teams moving above them and pushing them all the way back to 11. I guess we'll start there. I mean, I think maybe more than anything else, we need to reset the conversation, right? So the draft is, it's going to be upon us like super quick, and we're going to dive deep into all of these draft candidates and that stuff. And you're doing the same thing over at the King's Pulse podcast, where you and Bryant West are like really, really focusing in on two guys at one time. But if the Kings are number 7, let's just start
Careful
there.
with that wording there, James.
What did I don't even,
I don't know. I've been waiting for a time to call you out, so.
There may have been something I said.
Just be careful. Just be careful.
Be careful. If you're looking at number 7, I still think that there are like a variety of players that are going to be there, but most of them fit the Kings' needs. And let's start there. What is the Kings' biggest need, do you feel, like going into the draft or going into free agency?
I think I'm going to steal De'Aaron Fox's wording here. Length and shooting. And,
okay,
to be as simple as possible, I don't think that they can draft somebody that can't shoot. Unless you're talking it's like Apollo Banchero at the top, your third, and Chet, Holmgren, Jabari Smith are gone. And, like, you're taking Paulo because there's potential as a shooter, but there's just so much of a ceiling in the other aspects of his game that you just, like, are willing, that you have to take that bet. Like, sure, I get that. But to me, shooting is the requirement. And also, if I had to place another requirement, it's just that they don't project to be a crappy defender. Even if it's like below average, obviously that's not ideal. But I think that I'm just not, I don't think the Kings should be touching anybody that it projects as a either non-shooter or a very questionable shooter, whether that be volume or just their conversion rate, and free throw percentage is a good thing to look at when it comes to those sort of things. That, or a guy that projects to be a pretty negative defender, even if there's offensive upside. Those are two things that are, in my mind, the kind of requirements. And there's certainly more things that I would prefer in candidates, but I just don't see how you can bring on a guy that can't shoot, right, alongside Fox and Sabonis.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement. I think if you're really looking at the Kings' needs, you need to figure out if you believe that you have a starting level 2, right? Do you have a guy at the 2 that's going to be a starter? And, they've got plenty of guys to sort through here. They could try Davion Mitchell, De'Aaron Fox backcourt. They could try Fox with Terrence Davis. They could try Fox with Dante DiVincenzo. They could try Fox with Justin Holiday.
Do you think they should factor that in?
What? Who?
Like,
who
are
is
those
there?
guys that when you're sitting at, say, pick 7 or 8, that, like, should I factor in Dante DiVincenzo, Davion Mitchell, Terrence Davis in my pick? If there's a 2 that they really like?
Yeah. No, I think you're right, unless it's DiVincenzo. I think that would be the one where if you believe that Dante DiVincenzo is a starter alongside De'Aaron Fox, which was never tested, but and if you believe that, and you believe that Davion Mitchell is your third guard, you're looking at, that's a lot of minutes. That's 95 minutes, right? And I think there's really only 96 minutes between those two positions. You need other depth there, of course, but yeah, I mean, DiVincenzo's 24, going on 25, right? And Davion is young, 23 years old, and De'Aaron Fox is 24. Yeah, I think you should at least consider. I don't think you make any decision on whether, again, with Justin Holiday being like 33 and Terrence Davis being under a 1-year contract. But it plays into a larger question about your free agency and how you're going to handle DiVincenzo and all that stuff. So, like, if you believe that there's like a superstar sitting there that can be your pairing with De'Aaron Fox for the next decade, well, of course you go grab him. But I think most of the players we're looking at, number one, they're 2 threes that are around that range. So guys like Shaedon Sharpe, guys like Benedict Mathurin, AJ Griffin, Johnny Davis. But like, are any of them like showing so much promise that you can't, like, that you have to go that direction? And I don't think so. Like, again, you like AJ Griffin, or you did early in the draft process. Shaden Sharp is a guy who's jumping up draft boards everywhere. He's all the way up into the top 5 in most draft boards, and potentially like the top 4. There's even talk that some people could fall in love with him at number 1. So he is a guy that is all over the place as far as like what people consider him. And I think it has to do with like size and length. I think he's got like a 7-foot wingspan for a 6'6" guy. Yeah. So look, I think the Kings are going to have options. I think that's at the end of the day what we're talking about, right? There are going to be a lot of options there, but you're looking at a 2-3 combo type guy, or a 3-4 combo guy if you want to go like Keegan Murray, or you want to go Jeremy Sokan, or something like that. So I think they're going to have options, and I think that that's a good thing if they decide to stay at number 7, 8, 9, wherever they end up.
Yeah, that's one of the pluses with where they're picking, if it does stay, like you're saying, at 7, 8, 9. That most of the players in that range kind of fit positionally what they need anyways. Like you're saying, a 2-3 or a 3-4. I'm still a believer in DiVincenzo being a starting 2 guard. Not somebody that, I believe in kind of tiers, and I'm not reaching down a tier to help with fit and position. So if you have, say you're sitting there and AJ Griffin is the only guy, or who's better? AJ Griffin is a 3. Say Jaden Ivey is left on the board, a 2 guard, and you're sitting there at 7. Like, I'm not passing on Jaden Ivey if he's the only one left in that tier because of Donte DiVincenzo, for example. But Ivey probably not there at 7, but just kind of as an example. But luckily, most of these guys are guys that could play the 3 alongside DiVincenzo, depending on how anybody feels about him. Even Johnny Davis kind of fits in this conversation. It's interesting to me. Most of them are 3-4s and guys that I could see fitting what Sacramento needs. We talk about rim protection or defensive switchability and versatility, and also being able to hit the 3 ball and do a little bit of all the connecting things on offense. I have been pretty up and down with Keegan Murray throughout this process, but I'm currently up again right now. So that's where I'm at. AJ Griffin is another one that I've been up and down on. I'm currently feeling pretty good about AJ Griffin and his elite 3-point shooting and the skill that's there. But my question here that I'm not sure of is the guys that are projects and going to take time. And, there's guys that I can look at and give that label to that I'll probably be wrong about, that'll pan out earlier than expected. And there's also probably some that you think will work early and end up not. Like Obi Toppin, I think, was pretty popularly the guy that it's like he's going to click right away. If you want just the best player right away, it's Obi Toppin. And Toppin has, some things that I think made people realize ways that they draft philosophy maybe should have changed, myself included. But projects, can the Kings take on somebody that they don't think is going to be all that impactful in year one? Somebody that's only giving you, let's say, Trey Lyles level production in year one, even if that means progressing to Jeremy Grant level. And these are just calibers rather than specific prototypes, like Shaden Sharp, for example. It's a hard one for me. I view him as like an ultimate project. Obviously not having any time in college leads to that, but I'm also not a guy, admittedly, that's going to sit and dive through a crazy amount of high school tape or anything like that. So I'm sure that they will do their extensive research on Shaden Sharp, and maybe they don't view him as like raw and tough year one out the gate as I do, and I think most people will. Maybe they come to a different conclusion, but if the idea is using Shaden Sharp as an example, I think there's other guys that fall into this category as well. Can the Kings take a player that is not going to do much for you in year one if the idea is that they will progress in more down the line?
I think it always goes back to the conversation that we've like, where would you keep the pick? Like if you're 7, 8, 9, do you keep the pick? If you're 1, 2, 3, 4, do you keep the pick? Like where are you still in the same spot? Where are you at with that?
Yeah, it's all contextualized, right? It depends, like, what am I getting for the pick? One question I had for you coming into this, like, would you rather have, and this is a little too blunt, there's more complications, but Keegan Murray and on a rookie scale deal, or Jeremy Grant? I'm personally saying Keegan Murray. Jeremy Grant's expiring, but it's risky, right? Because part of the value with these rookies is the contract that they come in on, and having so much team control on team-friendly deals. Jeremy Grant, you know what you're getting. I think that's a player that the Kings need, that prototype. I know Jeremy Grant's not the most popular name. I think he's kind of exactly what the Kings need when it comes to a 4. Where are you at, like, with that example?
Yeah, I mean it's tough because I would want an extension, but I don't want the extension that they were talking about. When they were talking about trading him, he wanted $100 million extension, and he's already, 29-year-old player, and I wasn't sold because I don't think he's ever put up really good numbers on a good team, and so that's a little bit of a red flag. I agree. The player type, the archetype is Jeremy Grant. That's what you need. You need a weak side shot blocker. You need a guy who can do 3-and-D things. You got a guy that can do some things off a cut. And I really do think that Jeremy Grant is a guy that like you kind of circle and say, yeah, like I like his skill set. And can you get Jeremy Grant for the number 7 pick in the draft? Probably, especially with his contract status. And I would also you wouldn't make that deal unless it was a sign and trade, like a sign and extend, right? You would want to know that you're getting him locked up. But even still, I'd want to make sure that he's happy and that he's, overall the right player. And if I'm giving up like a number 7 pick, I'm not giving up Harrison Barnes. So like Jeremy Grant with Harrison Barnes makes more sense than Jeremy Grant without Harrison Barnes. And
and like Richaun Holmes and Justin Holiday, this is another thing with Holmes is if you're attaching a pick to him, his salary is so valuable for going out and getting these guys. Like attaching Justin Holiday to Richaun Holmes gets you the salary needed for Jeremy Grant. It also gets you the salary needed for like John Collins, for example.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good point. Like having, depth at the position, having the ability to go out and, make 3-team trades or 2-team deals. You have a bunch of expiring contracts. I'm still at the point where if the pick is 1, 2, 3, and maybe 4, and 4 at that point, it's going to come down to, Jaden Ivey, Shaden Sharp, I believe. And it's also possible that one of those guys somehow slides in the top 3 and pushes one of the power forwards to number 4. So I think that there is a possibility for that to happen. But if I'm in the top 3 of this draft, I'm keeping it because I think all of those guys not only have something that they can bring on day 1, but they have something that they can bring 2 years down the road that will be even greater than what they can bring on day 1.
Which is Chet, Jabari, and Paulo, right?
Yeah. And at this point, like I was kind of down on Paolo Banchero early on, and he's still number 3 on my list, but I would still consider him. I really do think that his skill set, in the long term, the Kings are going to need another scorer. You got Fox, you got Sabonis, you have Harrison Barnes, but Harrison Barnes is under a 1-year contract. Like you don't pass up on a guy who can be a 20 and 10 guy because you have other guys who can be like, 18 and 12 guys, or that you've got a guy like Harrison Barnes that can score. So if I'm the Kings, I'm going to keep an open mind when it comes to those guys. But clearly the number 1 and number 2 to me are Chet and Jabari. Like you can flip a coin and figure out who you like best. And I think for fit wise, they both fit really well. Maybe Jabari Smith Jr. fits better than Chet, but I'm still not even sold on that. I like Chet. I like what he can bring to the table defensively, and I think he's a better shooter and a better scorer than people think he is. So I'm still more of like a top three, and then if it's if it's anywhere outside of the top three, I'm really going to consider shopping it if it can get me a player that can help right away. That's a long-term fit.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. Those top two, I'm with you, like Chet Holmgren and Jabari Smith. If either of those guys are on the board, I think the Kings should jump on it so fast. I think their dream fits alongside Sabonis and just what the Kings need. I really, really like Chet. I'm maybe overlooking the weight concerns. Like, I understand why people have them, but length, timing, the skill that he has to put the ball on the floor, like I think that there's a decent chance he's a 40% three-point shooter on okay volume. I don't think he's creating offense for himself or anything like that, but when he gets a board, he can take it up the floor himself. I think he's fine in that aspect. He has playmaking that's there. Like, if you had, I think he's the ideal four or front court pairing with Domantas Sabonis. I am all about Chet Holmgren, but I would not mind taking Jabari Smith over him because I have them in the same tier, and I just don't see how Jabari gets messed up. Like, maybe Chet's weight is an issue. Jabari, to me, is going to be a really, really good NBA player, and like, I'd be shocked if he wasn't. I feel similarly for Chet, but I understand how there's more concerns there of a lower floor. But when you're at the top of the draft, like I was in doing kind of some draft coverage these past couple weeks, reading something from James Edwards, who covers the Pistons for The Athletic, and talking about how this might be the last chance, depending on like how Cunningham evolves in their young roster, last chance picking at the top of the lottery for a while. And if the Kings were to jump, like, when is the next chance realistically that you're getting to pick at the top of the lottery and have a chance at a guy that could seriously be a superstar? And Jabari does have a ceiling that he could be that as well, but to me, if you're at the very top, there's only so often that a team like Sacramento or Detroit, to kind of keep that parallel going, that doesn't have a great free agent pull or anything like that, has an opportunity to get a superstar. So I can't help but go for crazy upside, and I don't worry about the risk with Chet as much. After those top guys that I'm just dreaming about for the Kings, because again, they're just so perfect, and it's funny to me with I guess how much more involved I've got with covering this team, how I'm just waiting on lottery balls to see how drastically the future of this franchise changes. A little bit of a funny scenario to me, but I think that there's a decent amount of guys, like we talked about, that fit really, really well. I do like Keegan Murray. I like AJ Griffin. Like, if there's a situation you could get Keegan Murray and then trade for Jeremy Grant with that Richaun Holmes, Justin Holiday, in your next year's pick, say top 6 protected, top 8, even lottery protected, if Detroit would be willing to do that, and then Keegan Murray can come up under Jeremy Grant, for example. Like, I really like a scenario this offseason where they do take a guy at 6 or 7, 8, 9, if they don't end up jumping, that they can be a little bit more patient with, and then the trade they go make this offseason is working with next year's first round pick, like top 4 protected at worst.
Yeah. So when I look at this draft, I'm going to say this. We're going to dive deeper into the talent of these players as we go along. But when I look at this draft as a whole, there are 2 or 3 really nice players at the top, and then a lot of unknowns. Like, again, I watched AJ Griffin play in the Final Four, and I like his movement. I like his shooting. But he's supposed to be the super athlete, and he looks ground-based to me. Again, he's more Tyreek Evans, like ground-based player who can still get up and dunk, but is still mostly ground-based than, Jaylen Brown when I'm watching him play. And so I know he has those capabilities because we've seen him leap. We've seen Like he's got incredible vertical and all that stuff, but at the same time, I don't see him using that functionally. And so, like, I keep looking at all these players, and a lot of the players around where the Kings are going to draft, if it is 7, 8, 9, they're sort of limited in what they do. Or I don't know that the upside is totally there. Like Keegan Murray, I don't know that the upside is there in order to be a top 10 pick. And I can say the same thing about even like Davion Mitchell last year. I don't know that the upside is there. And then when I look at next year's draft, man, there are superstars in that draft. I don't even think we look at Jabari and Chet as superstars.
No.
We look at them as like potential all-star level players, but potential, not like a can't miss. Now, we look at next year's draft at the top, like there's
Victor Wum.
However you want to say it.
I'm not good with these names. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah,
Generational. I think that word gets overused, but holy crap.
Well, that and Scoot Henderson, like, oh my goodness. So I'm not doing anything with next year's pick, especially if this thing spins out and you start to worry about whether, Sabonis is going to be there or Harrison Barnes is going to be there. I mean, in a perfect world, like, fans don't want to hear this. In a perfect world, the Kings would be playing to be bad this year to set themselves up with a superstar for next year. Like that probably would have been
deep, though.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I mean, 16 years too deep, but also when it comes to Sabonis, when it comes to Fox and all that stuff, you just can't throw away another year of these guys, their contracts, their careers. But when I'm looking at that next year's draft, it's like, man, that changes everything. Those guys change everything. And Chet and Jabari, again, like Chet is an outlier. We have no idea what Chet is going to be. Like he's a true like unicorn player. Like he's so incredibly unique in what he does. But Jabari, I mean, it's really easy to look at Jabari and go, oh yeah, he looks just like Jaren Jackson Jr. But with a better rebounding Jaren Jackson Jr. That's what he looks like. And that would fit perfectly with what the Kings have going. So I think it comes down to fit versus like the potential. Like I don't think the Kings should go full, the process. But I could, and with next year's draft in mind, I could see why people would want that.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. That's why I'm for sure putting top 4 protections on any pick if I'm the Kings going into next year. Like I think any situation that you're not doing top 4 protected, it better be bringing back somebody crazy, and the other team is betting on those sort of odds. And top 4, because obviously the scenario we're dealing with right now of when you're one of the later teams, that's the only situation you can jump into is within the top 4. It used to be top 3 until they changed those lottery odds. But part of like, you can't play both sides. No, like some teams can. Look at the Warriors, right? But like the Kings can't, and they haven't picked one. And correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure they haven't traded a first-round pick since they've drafted De'Aaron Fox.
They had traded the pick in 2015. Vlade made the deal to trade Jason Thompson, Carl Landry, and Nick Stauskas for a future first-round pick and 2 pick swaps. The pick swap happened in 2017, where they went from 3 to 5, and they got the pick swapped with Philadelphia. And then they lost the 2019 pick because of that trade. So, yeah, they had Marvin Bagley.
And was Romeo Langford at 14.
Yeah. So they had Fox in 2017, but also Justin Jackson, Harry Giles, Frank Mason. They brought over Bogdan Bogdanovic, all those guys in 1 year. But then the next year they had Marvin Bagley, and then no pick the next year. So since 2000, the 05-06, when they made the playoffs for the last time, they have selected in the lottery every year since. And in multiple seasons, they have multiple first-round picks. But like Spencer Hawes, Jason Thompson, Tyreek Evans, DeMarcus Cousins, Jimmer Fredette, Ben McLemore, Nick Stauskas, Yorgos Papagiannis, Willie Cauley-Stein, De'Aaron Fox, Marvin Bagley, and then of course we skip to the last 2 years, which are Tyrese,
Sabonis.
Tyrese, and Davion. So like they've drafted inside of the lottery every year, and like they just haven't hit. I mean, at the end of the day, they've made too many mistakes. Oh, I missed Thomas Robinson. Damn it.
Oh,
I did. I missed Thomas Robinson after.
They missed
after
on that
Jimmer
one too.
Fredette.
Yeah, I think
just a little bit.
Yeah, I think my point being though that if you're trying to win games right now, then act like it. Like you have to at some point. You just traded away. Like I still think I know it's not extremely short-sighted, but it is more focused on right now to swap out Halliburton for Sabonis. And if you're trying to make something happen right now, I think at some point they need to trade first-round picks, future first-round picks, for known commodities. And so I'm skeptical about towing this line of, yes, the top of next draft is extremely enticing. They shouldn't be at the top of next draft. Maybe they jump, and I'm putting top 4 protections on anything, like I said. But to me, like, I would feel like this situation and the way that they're building out this team is weird and too much of trying to play both sides when you're still not even sure. I'm not sure, at least, if this is even a play-in roster. Like, probably, but it's still just probably.
Well, as it is right now, it's not. I mean, I don't think. I mean, it might be close, but, like, you got so many dudes on one-year deals that, like, this roster isn't set. I want to see what this roster looks like July 15th. Like, what do they do with this roster? How do they change it? How do they make it better? If you're building around Fox and Sabonis, like, how much can you change in 1 year? And, we're going to get into free agency. We're going to get into all that stuff. Like, there are free agent players that can help you. And even Brenden and I were talking, there are interesting things like Dante DiVincenzo. We keep talking about, like, oh, he's probably a mid-level exception guy, right? Well, you can have him go out and sign an offer sheet somewhere, and then you can match that offer sheet, and it's just because he was getting an MLE somewhere else. When the contract comes to you, it's a Larry Bird contract. It's not an MLE contract. So when you match, you still have your MLE. So you can go out and sign another $10 million player. You can have Dante DiVincenzo and another $10 million player. That is the sort of the blessing of being a under the cap, number one, and you'll get up to the cap when you match on DiVincenzo, and then you can go above. But also someone who is in good cap flexibility right now, like where you're in a good space. And so anyway, there are lots of ways that they can improve this roster, but what you don't want to do is have a whole stack of $10 million players and not enough, flexibility and money to go get a better player when a better player comes available.
Do you think that adding those sort of complementary guys is enough? MLE caliber players, or a player that you're adding at the 7 pick, say you don't hit a home run, it's just even a low starter caliber guy. Like, is that enough for this roster, or do they need one more top end talent?
No. Like, that's where, like, if I'm outside of the top 3, I'm trading this pick almost assuredly. Like, I might wait to see if somehow you land at number 4. I might wait to see how the top 3 goes before I actually move the pick. Especially knowing that someone is going to fall in love with one of those 2 guys that are going to be there. And so I definitely would keep all my options open. But if I'm 7, 8, 9, you can't keep waiting. You have to actually go out and try to improve this roster. And that doesn't mean that you're going to find, you don't make a move just to make a move. You make a move because it's right and it pushes your franchise further ahead, right? Your goal here is to actually be good, and that should be your goal. It should be your goal every year, but specifically this season, I think it's probably a bigger goal. And so, like, if somehow I can package, Richaun Holmes going somewhere else and my first pick and maybe a pick a couple of years from now, and I can come back with the John Collins, I'm all in. Like if you can. But again, that means Atlanta wants to trade John Collins. We don't know that that's going to be the case. So, and I make this point every time we talk about stuff like this, but like who's available right now and who's available in 2 weeks and 3 weeks and a month, it totally changes. Like someone is going to be available. We didn't know Sabonis was going to be available. We'd heard rumors in December, but then we got to the deadline and everything we were hearing was that Sabonis wasn't going to get moved, that they were going to try to build around him in Indiana. And everything we'd heard here in Sacramento was that Tyrese Halliburton was pretty much untouchable. Like it would have to be like a Godfather deal. And sure enough, deal happened. And so these things happen, like things change. The NBA landscape changes all the time, and you have to be able to roll with it and be prepared to make a move when the right thing comes about. And the fact that Monty McNair, I know this is something that people don't want to hear because they love Tyrese Halliburton, but the fact that they were able to get Sabonis without a draft pick is a tremendous coup. I mean, that's incredible. And now what do? Now you still have your picks. Now you can go add another huge, huge piece. And again, you bring up Jeremy Grant. Like Jeremy Grant would be a huge piece for this team. And I'm not giving up a lot more than the number 7 pick. Even if I do know that I'm locking him up, I don't think he's worth much more than that. Like as a 29-year-old guy, even if you have him for 4 years. But I think he improves you greatly right away, and he fits perfectly. And if, you're starting to build, if your starting 5 walking into next season somehow is De'Aaron Fox, Dante DiVincenzo, Harrison Barnes, Jeremy Grant, and Domantas Sabonis, I think you're pretty solid. Terrence Davis off the bench, Davion Mitchell off the bench, start piecing the thing together around those guys, and maybe you got something, especially if you can take, if you move Richaun Holmes in that deal, but you're able to package some of these other expiring contracts and go get someone that's on another team. Maybe a Terrence Davis makes more sense for a team like Charlotte than a guy like PJ Washington. Maybe you can make a swap like that. Like there are going to be trades that pop up that make sense for both teams where you can rebalance this roster. And I think maybe that's the biggest thing. I don't just want to see a bunch more talent on this roster. Like at some point, talent has to fit. You need to start getting, players that both fit and are more talented than what you already have. You can't just keep loading up and walking the season with like 7 guards and 4 centers, and then nobody at the 2 and the 3. I mean, no one at the 3 and the 4 outside of Harrison Barnes, who's just like I can only defend one of these positions. So
yeah, I don't know. I think they can. I think that I'm not going to put anything past them at this point. I think that I'm with you with what you're saying of kind of need to figure it out sooner rather than later. They need to start piecing this thing together even more so than they already have. And they have started, but continue that process. The idea of you never know who's going to become available. Totally get you. My question for you, how patient can you be of we want to move Richaun Holmes or a draft pick for a more immediate contributor, but there's just not a deal right now that's doing it for us. Down the line, something will come up. So we're going to wait until the next deadline or the next offseason. Like, at what point is it like we can't wait? It almost feels, and maybe this is a lazy comparison because of Daryl Morey, but it almost feels Ben Simmons-esque, where it's like, how long can you actually wait before it's like, okay, you just need to get something right now because this is a window that you can't just stall out.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting discussion because we watched them stall out last year, right? Not this season, but the season before. Like they did nothing. Like there was nothing that happened in free agency, and it was all compacted. And they did a good job of bringing in Tyrese Halliburton as their draft pick, but outside of Halliburton, 2 second-round picks that you ended up waiving, that didn't even make the squad. I mean, they did, but then they waived them this season, and neither one, Jemias Ramsey and Robert Woodard, didn't develop. Clearly, there was something that they just weren't moving along at the right pace. And then on top of that, I mean, your offseason was those two and Hassan Whiteside and Glenn Robinson III. Like that's not enough. Like they can't stall out like that this year. I don't expect them to, but I also don't think that it's healthy for the team to walk into a season like you did last year with Buddy Hield and Marvin Bagley. So I think that there is a pressure on this team to actually make moves. And look, if all you could get for, let's say if Richaun Holmes, like you can't really get a player, but someone has a little bit of cap space and is willing to take him on for like a draft pick between number 15 and like number 22. Well, do it. Like that's huge because if you do that, then you keep, the Stepien rule from getting to you. So if you do that move, but then go and trade your number 7 pick, then all of a sudden you don't have to, you can trade multiple years of picks. You don't have all this delay because you still have a draft pick. So I think there are ways for this team to improve. Even if it's just reshuffling like the chairs on the deck, right? Like if it's Richaun Holmes going somewhere specifically for just a player that fits better at a position of need, then you got to do it. I totally feel that way. And you can't go into this season. You need a really, really strong 9 to 11 guys, with the back end being some guys that are young and need to be brought up through the system and stuff like that. We get to this position here where the Kings don't have anyone under the age of 23 on the roster. Nemi is with a 2-way, but Davion is a 23. They don't have anyone young at all. That's really, really strange for a team that's not very good to not have a bunch of young players that they're bringing along. I mean, even Memphis, you look at Memphis, they're the number 2 seed in the playoffs, right? They're fighting it out with the Golden State Warriors, but they still have a whole bunch of like 21, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-old players, like a bunch of them, not like one or two, like a stack of them. They're so much younger than the Kings. That's a problem.
Yeah, New Orleans got a lot of young guys on that roster. Minnesota might lean a little bit more towards Sacramento's situation, but I think that they're still a younger roster. I mean, specifically, like I think of Anthony Edwards as a standout there, Jaden McDaniels as well. It's an interesting situation where I understand sometimes you got to kind of wait out for the most optimal value, and sometimes it pays off, but I don't know that the Kings can do all too much waiting right now, so it'll be an interesting offseason. There's definitely some substantial moves that need to be made, and I don't think it's another one of those years because said the same thing last offseason, but I was able to talk myself into, okay, there just wasn't a right deal. They're kind of waiting until something does pop up. I don't know that I can pitch that same logic this offseason.
Yeah. There are other teams in the same situation as the Kings, and I think that's a good thing. There are other teams that have got to a point where they look at their roster and they're thinking, okay, we have to shake things up. We can't. We've got stuck at one point. And, again, Atlanta is one of those teams. Charlotte is one of those teams where they have to try something different. Washington is one of those teams where you keep looking at where they are and where they want to be, and they don't match up. Teams that aren't looking to be bad. Yeah, Utah. Teams that aren't looking to be bad but happen to be bad or happen to fall apart like at a certain point in the playoffs where they need something different to mix it up to get them over the hump. That's where the Kings need to live. They need to live in that sweet spot of finding teams that are in somewhat similar situations and trying to make a move with those teams to better themselves, or finding teams that are young and aren't looking to get better anytime soon, but maybe have a player that's aging out a little bit out of what their plan is. And, would they take picks for a 23-year-old guy that's under team control for a long time that has some really solid upside that just doesn't fit the sort of the player arc of that team. So it's going to be interesting. But I think the one good thing is that we just watched a coaching search go through, and it feels like Monty McNair, Wes Wilcox, they got their guy, and that they have control of what's happening here. And I think that the trimming down of voices is big in Sacramento. We have fewer voices in the room, fewer cooks in the kitchen, and to me that is a good thing. It shows me that maybe they're looking to build something permanent here, as opposed to something that always feels temporary and chaotic behind the scenes. Brenden, we talked a little bit about this on Tuesday, and me and Sean, I think we expressed our displeasure with what's happening. But the Kings have held pre-draft workouts 3 times this week. 6 players have come through each time, so 18 different players. Have you looked at the list, and is there anything that stands out to you on the list? Because, again, we're not getting to see these players, and I'm not going to say it's out of spite, but I'm just going to tell you, if you're going to put out a list of guys who are mid-second to undrafted players, and that's how you're going to handle, you're not going to let us get our hands on them, we're not going to interview them and all that stuff, then I'm probably not going to do more than put a tweet out, because I'm not going to, what am I adding to the conversation about a potentially undrafted player when I don't have any firsthand knowledge? I don't see them. I don't look at them. I don't hear how they speak or their understanding of the game or anything else. So I'm just basically, until we get let in the building, which I hope is soon, I'm not going to cover them all that extensively outside of, again, tweeting out a name and where they went to college.
Yeah. Most of the guys that they've brought in, which now at this point, it was how many today? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's been 6 each time. So yeah, we're up to 18 different guys that they've brought in so far here, reported over these last 3 days now. They're all older. There were a couple guys in today's workout that were juniors, or 2 sophomores and a junior. And there actually is a handful of juniors. The 2 sophomores are the standouts today. It's funny with how this draft process has been over, and college process with COVID and people getting extra years of eligibility. There's multiple guys that are finishing their 6th year. 6th. There's a couple 5th years also, but 6 years. I want to say there's 2 of them. I know Grant Golden is one, and the other is Jariah Horn. 6 years is pretty crazy. But
they opened that up they opened it up so anyone who is in college could just apply for another year of eligibility, regardless of how many years they'd already played or how many years they still had in front of them. So if you were a freshman who played a full season, you could apply for another year of eligibility and know that you're going to be there for another 4 years. I think it's pretty brilliant, especially if you can get, if you're on scholarship, and somehow they're going to let you do 5 years to get your degree, and maybe you're even into a graduate program at that point, which I know who's the big kid from UCLA that with the big beard?
Johnny Juzang?
Oh, no. That's not who I'm thinking. North Carolina. So who's the guy that got thrown out for throwing an elbow in the Elite 8 or the Sweet 16?
Oh, shoot.
I'm pretty sure he's a grad student.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I brought him up. I'm pretty
Brady
sure.
Manick. Yeah.
Yeah, Manick. I think he already graduated from North Carolina, and he's in grad school. And then there were a couple of shooting guards that were they just kept playing. I'll take it. Guys who are playing 170 college games. You're like, that is a lot of college games. Good for you. I mean,
Yeah.
hold on to that dream, man. Hold on to that dream. So
Right.
outside of that, was there anything that like stood out? Like,
Yeah, theme wise or consistencies of maybe like skills that are similar with a lot of these guys. They're all 3-point shooters, and the guys that are not 3-point shooters have really good stock numbers, steals and blocks. It was pointed out to me after last draft cycle. Almost everyone that Monty's taken has some pretty positive steal and block numbers for their position relatively. And yeah, I mean, most of these players are really good 3-point shooters, and any of the ones that aren't, Grayson Murphy from Belmont, he's 6'2", but only 25% from 3 on questionable volume, but 52% from the field and 2.3 steals per game. If you look at, let's see, Kiev Aluma. I really struggle with college names, to be honest. I watch games on mute, so I don't get these names in amazingly until a little bit later in the process. We're going with Kiev Aluma, Virginia Tech, right? Only 33% from 3, which is okay, but he's putting up 15.8 points, 6.5 rebounds, 1.9 assists as a 6'9" guy, and 0.8 steals per game, 0.9 blocks. Everybody that is not shooting from 3 is steals and blocks and still pretty efficient from the field. Kenneth Lofton is the one from today's workouts, Louisiana Tech, sophomore, 6'7", doesn't shoot from 3 hardly at all, but you still get 1.2 steals, 0.7 blocks, and 53% from the field, and he's got some passing chops as a big. So pretty much everybody is shooting threes, and if you're not, then you're doing a lot of the other things well, whether that be defensive playmaking with steals and blocks or passing as a big.
yeah, it's interesting. And so people know they usually bring in 6 players. A lot of times they'll bring in like 2 guards, 2 wings, 2 bigs. I don't think the Kings are going to bring in a lot of bigs, but they usually group them together so they can have them battle against each other and like pick up games.
That was the weird thing with today's. There's one 6'10", Abagidi, Washington State, 6'10". Everybody else 6'5", 6'5", 6'5", 6'7", 6'7".
Sometimes it's just where you can get a guy in. And is he a banger? Or is he a 3-point shooter?
I think he's a rim runner, not a shooter.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, like I remember when years ago when Tobias Harris was in the draft, Tobias Harris and Tyler Honeycutt had like 8 workouts against each other, and they're both like at that point small forwards, except for Tobias Harris was like, I want to say he's 6'9", 220 coming into the draft, and Tyler Honeycutt was like 6'7", like 170. And so everywhere they went, Tobias Harris just would back down Tyler Honeycutt and like dominate him because he weighed 50 pounds more than him. And so there are some like weird anomalies, and you don't always get like true competition. And but on occasion you do have good matchups. You do have like a Kyle Kuzma versus Justin Jackson, I believe, battled in Sacramento. You have these matchups that make sense, and then you get to see how guys play against, similar size and stuff like that. So so people know, like, if you hear us complain because we're not there, it's really not about, we don't get to watch a bunch of footage. We don't get to watch these guys like doing all kinds of drills and like going through the whole thing. They never let any of that out. And they don't want like their secret sauce as to how they work players out. They don't want everyone knowing that because every team is different. But at the same time, it is good to be there to, again, listen to how someone handles a media, to listen to how someone talks about basketball, or whether they literally have no idea that they're not an NBA player at all, but they're talking a big game, or to actually see how tall somebody is in person, to see, there are things that jump off the screen when you see somebody, when you're like standing next to Taco Fall. That's an experience, and you get to see just how tremendously tall and like wide this guy is. But it goes for all kinds of different players. You get, again, I remember Lou Dort coming through, and you're just like, holy cow. I mean, he's just ripped, and he just, he didn't talk a big game at all. He's super quiet, very straightforward. You're always looking for things that you can just add to the bucket of why you like a player or why you might not like a player. And every once in a while, it doesn't translate at all. But sometimes it does, like, again, LaMelo Ball, I think, like, one of the worst interviews there ever was. It still is one of the worst interviews there you can possibly imagine. It doesn't mean he's not an outstanding basketball player, because he is. And, I mean, he's tremendously gifted. He's just not good with the media. And I don't know why, because those guys have been in the media forever, and they've been with cameras rolling forever. He's just bad. But he's not the only one that's been bad. There are so many players that you just went, oh my gosh, that was horrible. But it's good to be there and to get your hands on guys a little bit and kind of figure out who they are. And so not being there is kind of it is a big bummer, because I like to have that as part of my draft understanding going into every year.
Yeah. I'd like to experience it and get a little bit of a feel for that process. Let's close with this, James, unless you got something else. The Kings jump to 1. Who you taking?
It's tough. I think I roll the dice with Chet.
I'm with you.
I think there's too much there. And it could be a mistake. But, like, again, I think Jabari Smith Jr. is going to be a really good basketball player, and I think he fits perfectly. I just feel like there's upside as far as like what like an athlete, you see an athlete and you see like what he can look like if his skill set gets better and the things he does really well. And then every once in a while there's a player that you look at and you just think, my goodness, like, he does this really well. He does this really well. He does this really well. Does it translate? Is he so wafer thin that he's just going to get thrown around at the NBA level? But there's so much to like about his game overall, and just like his basketball IQ, his defensive acumen, his length, his ability to play multiple positions. There's just so much to like, and sure, there's going to be question marks with all of these kids coming in, but if it all works, he's a 5-tool player, and that's something that, like, it's hard to find. Like, again, he is like a unicorn player where it's just so hard to compare him to someone else.
Yeah. I got asked if I had a comp for Chet, and I was like, I don't think there's one that exists anywhere. There's
no,
nothing.
People say Porzingis, and it's like,
that's just because, you have to find something, right? Like,
I guess, yeah. I don't buy the comp though.
No.
Like, and
the fluidity is different.
Yeah, no, it is. It's the fluid, and the defensive mindset is different. Just overall, like, and the passing skills are totally different. Like, his ability to set guys up. So, yeah, if there's one player that's off the charts intriguing, it's him.
Yeah. Okay, it sounds like we're on the same page there, Chet. If it's Jabari, I'm still more than happy. Are you the same?
Yeah.
If it was Jabari first, how would you feel? And I guess I'll answer first and then see where you're at. What if it was Paulo that they took first? I mean, it would just mean that they clearly view him as the best player available, obviously. I would talk myself into it. I'm going to have Paulo in the same tier as those guys, I think. I don't think it's that difficult to talk myself into. Because at the top, you draft for who you view as the best player available. So to me, that would have to mean that they clearly viewed him as the best player available. Because if it's close to them in their evaluation with Chet and Jabari, it's so easy to me to go with Chet or Jabari. Like the fit is so much more seamless compared to what you're going with Paulo. If they ended up going with Paulo at number 1, I would be pretty disappointed initially, but again, it's easy to talk myself into the passing that Paulo has. Paulo's the only guy that, to be honest, I see as having potential to be a number one initiator of an NBA offense. I still don't know that I'm like betting on that outcome, but I think he has the highest possibility of doing that rather than Chet or Jabari. I'd be really worried about what the defensive fit looks like, but like the talent's there. If the Kings are selecting number 1 and they end up going with Paulo, what's your reaction there?
Yeah, if it's just raw numbers, Paulo is a really, really intriguing player. Like, I mean, he is going to translate to the NBA. He is going to be a solid player that could be your leading scorer for years and years. The Kings are going to need more scoring. It doesn't matter that they have Fox and Sabonis. They're going to need more scoring long term, and he would make sense in that way. If they have the 3rd pick, I'm fine with that. If they're number 1, then I probably would have a lot of trouble. And I don't think that that's how they value the players either. I think they value the players similar to how we value them, that there's a clear top 2, and then after the top 2, Paulo is probably number 3, and then after that, it's really a crapshoot. I believe that that's kind of their thinking, just from conversations that I've had around the team. So I would put that out there, that it does kind of look like they have a similar hierarchy or a tier system to what you or I have. So
love it.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to finish with the business of basketball. We have not done the business of basketball, and we've just gone through actually it's been a wild week. And so my question to you, Brenden, is this is the first time you've gone through a coaching search like this. It's the first time you've seen it kind of come to completion. It's unique in that the coach is still coaching, and he's normally, he would be an assistant, so we wouldn't have as much like just wild banter going on about him. But the fact that he's had to take over the Golden State Warriors, Mike Brown is like out in front of it. But it's not just that. It's over the last couple of days, as someone who covers a team, you may not be talking about it, you may not be writing about it, but you're still processing the Mike Brown situation mixed with the Richaun Holmes situation, and realizing that we're like 3 or 4 weeks into the offseason, and this is how much content is still there, how much chaos and craziness, and how this job does not end, on tax day like it normally does, like April 15th. It's like, hey, Kings are done. Here we are, like middle of May and second week of May, and it's chaos. It's all over the place.
It is. I'm a little used to like off seasons being kind of peak time for content, just because draft coverage is usually something that I think a lot of Kings fans end up finding themselves consuming a lot with the situations that the Kings are usually in at the end of the year. But yeah, I mean, this draft or the coaching search did kind of catch me off guard somehow. Like, obviously knew that it was coming, but the extent of what it looked like on our end of just the amount of research, like we talked about going through it here on this podcast, that like we were actually able to do on specifically the guys that don't have prior head coaching experience. Like at first it was like, okay, I guess I'm just gonna like talk hypothetically about these guys a little bit, but no, there was so much that you're able to find if you really dig on each one of these candidates. So I think that just, I wasn't expecting that process to take so much of my time, and not complaining at all. I think I'm happy to have like gone through that process and learn for, I was going to say next time. Hopefully there's not a next time for a good while. But it's a learning process that I'm glad to have gone through. I just don't know that I expected it that much. I got really looking forward to draft content and started doing like some of those profiles on King's Pulse with Bryant, and then quickly just had to fully transition out of it. Like we pushed back the Jaden Ivey and Johnny Davis one that I'm recording not too long after this, like an additional week, because I was like, man, I just didn't have time to get to diving into their film with all of the coaching candidate stuff going on. So a little different than I expected, even though I knew the coaching search was going to come. The process was more extensive on my end than I thought it would be.
I repeat this all the time. Life is what happens when you're making other plans. In the NBA,
Yeah.
that's how we have to roll. And it's there is no off season, and there's like a month in August. There's 4 or 5 weeks in August, September where you can take a little bit of a break, but even then, we'll be cranking out content. So it's always good to get that fresh perspective because, again, this is the first time you're going through it. The first time that you're so set in what you're going to do, and you have so many plans. And with this franchise, you learn that like planning out what's going to happen next is nice to, like, in theory, but you're more of a fireman putting out fires the whole time than you are someone who gets to lay out a scheme, a plan for what's going to happen for the next 6 weeks. There's always something that's happening. You always get knocked off kilter.
Always something. I feel like I'm constantly saying like, oh, I'm just back in a rhythm now. I feel good about this. And then something will throw it off, bound to happen. And then just a process of trying to find it again. And it's this entire loop going on. And I am living the dream and happy with the way this year progressed. But it's a lot sometimes, man, as I'm sure you're aware. Don't got to get too deep into it, but a lot of other things in my life I realized that I wasn't putting enough time into.
Have you enjoyed at least a little bit of being on the other side and having as much information, whether it's your information or it's other people's information or just on that whole information side?
I love it. Like this, again, like not being hyperbolic with it at all, like literally a dream come true. And I think I get too caught up in the moment. I think I've said it before, like I have a friend I've kind of gone through the process with a little bit that covers the Celtics, and it's more so like we say things to each other and have to remind or point out, like, listen to what you just said and how cool you would have thought that was a year ago even. So I get a little caught up that maybe I don't appreciate it as much as I should in the moment sometimes. But yeah, I mean, I love it. I mean, I'm constantly trying to figure out new information. I ask a lot of questions and try to find the right people to ask a lot of different questions to, and it's been a fun process. There is a interesting balance that I'm still trying to figure out of hearing so many other people's opinions that are also well informed and how that ends up molding my own opinions, and still finding my, like, independence isn't the right word, but comfortability with my take separate than kind of what from everybody else's is, as long as mine is obviously like well researched and everything, or not going into say film of a prospect with already a certain idea in mind because I've heard other things. So it's an interesting balance that I think I'm still working on and will be for a while, but definitely far from complaining.
There we go. All right. Just so everyone knows, we had audio and internet issues, video issues throughout the podcast. So it's going to take a little while to get this thing cut up and put together. And Brenden will be handling some of it. I will be handling some of it. We'll get it up as soon as possible. But huge shout out to everyone who is jumping on board with the Kings Beat. We really are growing so quickly, and it's fun to watch. The podcast numbers are tremendous. The video numbers here are tremendous. Tons of new followers, and just thank you to everyone out there. We're going to have a happy hour coming up very soon. I've almost got the guest locked into a date. But before I do, I want to make sure that I'm locked in before I announce anything.
That's a good one, though.
Yeah. I'm working on a new happy hour shirt, which I think is really cool. My dude over at Brick House Industries. Jim has done some more amazing work, and so we're gonna have a happy hour shirt, which I think is cool. But
By the way, hilarious text from you that I got yesterday, updating me that there's something about Mary. I always feel like I'm getting this name
there's
wrong.
something about Mary. Yes,
Is on Amazon Prime, so I'm gonna get on it by the next episode. I will have figured out what's going on with Mary.
yeah. Okay. So Brenden will come back to us and he'll be saying Franks and Beans. He'll be saying some of the great taglines from There's Something About Mary that we have all known and loved so much. So
Yeah, it's a slow process of educating me and getting me more cultured here, I guess.
I know someone in the comments down below asked if Brenden has seen their baseball, and Brenden has no idea. Have you seen my baseball? Brenden has no idea what that means, and that's funny.
No.
It's good stuff.
No clue.
Yeah. All right.
Well,
that's
start
gonna
referencing TikToks here soon, by the way.
Oh no, no, that's not good. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Kings Beat podcast. Big shout out to Brenden for joining me here, and Sean will be back next week. We just, again, some days it's going to work out this way where there's just two of us. Someday there will be three of us. It's good to have a little bit of variety here and a little bit of flexibility. We have the draft lottery on Tuesday. We'll try to figure out how we're going to handle the podcast on that day. But barring like us going live and doing something like that, which is always, a possibility, it'll probably be just a normal Tuesday morning podcast. So again, for Brenden Nunes, I am James Ham. Thanks for tuning into the Kings Beat podcast. We will see you on Tuesday.